Welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here. Today is Friday, September 10th, 2021, and today we're going to be discussing the 2022 midterm elections and take an updated look at my 2022 Senate election prediction. So, since I last did one of these predictions, a lot of the things that are happening in the country has changed. The nationwide environment has moved further away from, the middle. We have seen a lot of different events that could have long-lasting impacts on these races, and we've also had some developments in some of these races with candidates running and things like that, endorsements that become important things in a lot of these Senate races. So I think it's very good that we update these videos so often. But before we do begin this updated prediction, I want to remind you guys to like, subscribe, and to turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. And I also want to remind you that channel memberships are now open. If you would like to become a Purple Political Talk channel member, you could do so by pressing the link down in the description or the join tab next to the subscribe button. But, I also now, in a segue to that, I did want to give a very big thanks to our Purple Political Talk channel members, David Maxwell and Adam Hurst. We really cannot do this without you. So now that we've gotten all of this out of the way, let's get started with the video. So over the last, couple of weeks, we've seen big shifts in, I would say, two major things. One, where the Republicans are starting to land on message-wise. And along with that, I think goes hand in hand with number two, that the Democrats are starting to, kind of fall in popularity. Their ideas are becoming less popular. And I think that at a general level, if we were to generalize, we could say that the Democratic Party has definitely lost a lot of support over the last month. And, it's a big amount of factors. There's countless of factors, to say the least. Afghanistan, the economy, all these different things are important and they add up. And ultimately, these might end up being things that swing closer races. At a general perspective, a lot of these races, at least at the safe level, where all these states that were going safe blue regardless will continue to go safe blue. Where we're seeing a lot of the shifts when it comes to these elections is where you had elections that had very close tipping points, where I think we could say that right now it's a little bit more likely that the Democrats lose support in certain races and might end up costing the race in places that they could have had a decent chance. But right now on your screen, you're going to see the states that would always go blue regardless. And now I'm going to start filling the red states. And ultimately, what I think right now we're looking at with the 2022 midterm elections, we're looking at a race that is going to be very dependent on, excitement. Excitement is going to be something that's going to be crucially important. And we're also going to end up seeing where, cultural issues, social issues could be more prevalent. And by social issues, what do I mean? I'm not only talking about, the liberal side of things where you see a lot of excitement for climate change, where you see excitement for, things like pro-choice and things like that. I'm talking more towards COVID-19. COVID-19 is going to be present in 2022, whether we like it or not. There is no way this, disease, as much as we would all want it to be eradicated by the 2022 elections. So with that being said, I think that could have long-term impacts because we're starting to see things with the Biden administration that could end up being pretty bad, popularity-wise, with, the mandating of, vaccine requirements and a lot of these different COVID measures, which have proven to be very unpopular. And one thing that we can tell is COVID is an issue that unites both Democrats and Republicans, but Republicans are, more willing to go fight for it. And I think that could have long-term impacts. And if the Biden administration continues to push some of these COVID policies, such as the mandatory vaccine for children over 12, to go to school and things like that, they could start facing problems in these midterm elections. And I'm going to get more into that, in a minute. And last thing I want to do before I kind of set the stage to talk about the our toss-up states is the economy. The economy right now is in a very deeply bad state. Yes, job numbers went up by 200,000 jobs, but first of all, that's not really that much. And second of all, what really matters is salaries are not enough right now because inflation is through the roof. We must think, irresponsible spending by the US government. and it's gotten real bad during the pandemic. And I think that we are on the verge of economic crash or, an economic devaluation, one of the two, because there is no way to course correct this economy the way it is now. And Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen has said that right now the U.S. economy is not in a good state. So when we look at all that together, I think that it kind of shows and sets up the environment to be very pro Republican in 2022. And we're probably going to be looking at something similar. At the feels I'm getting right now is Tea Party 2010. That is, I think, where we're headed. And it's going to be a very interesting election. So now that I've gotten this kind of lecture and setting up the environment out of the way, let's get started with the toss-up states. Let's start off with likely states for the Democratic Party. So across these Senate races, I think the Democrats have a good chance of winning these Senate races in certain states by more than 5%, but less than 15%. So among these races, I think that, for example, places like Colorado is somewhere where the Democrats could build up enough support, solidify their votes here. But I think that's kind of where it ends. I think that there's a couple other states that could get close to the 5% mark, but they're not going to make it just yet. And I think that what this is telling us is that, this map kind of is, I would say, out of all the 3 Senate race maps, the most neutral. When it comes to favoring or unfavoring, because there's a good amount of, swing states and new swing states at that on this map. And, I think that, for example, in this map, the Democrats have some disadvantages, but overall, they have, certain advantages. And I think that, in Colorado and other states I'm going to talk about later in the video, although they might be closer, we're going to see how the polarization of the country is going to be an important thing as well. Places like Colorado, they may get a little bit closer than usual, but I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal because the country is so polarized. So that covers the Democratic likely states. Let's now discuss the Republican likely states. The Republicans have a little bit more likely states because there are more states that I would argue that in the past have been, further in their column and they've gotten closer because of many distinct reasons. Whether it be migration to the southern part of the country, people not liking Trump and Trump being the big brand of the party might be another, issue. And I think that is such case in South Carolina and Alaska. In both of these states, we're seeing how, and more so in Alaska than South Carolina, and the Alaska race is very interesting because we have essentially a primary between Kelly Shibaka and, Lisa Murkowski. And it's going to be the real test of Trump versus anti-Trump inside the GOP. And honestly, this race, if I had to predict it, I would say that Lisa Murkowski would end up being the winner. I think it just comes down to the fact that she is the incumbent. She is popular. And Trump doesn't have as big of a hand on the state of Alaska like he does in other states. And for South Carolina, I think that Tim Scott is such a good candidate. And I think he's the future of, the Republican Party. He could easily win this race by I would say, around 14-15%. I still do think that the Democrats could run somewhat of a campaign here and get some of the vote and make it closer, similar or a little bit more than what it has been in the last couple of years. And, everything else on this map is up for grabs because either A, they have very good candidates on both sides of the aisle, or B, the whole environment thing I explained before I started making the prediction is coming into play. But, this covers all of our likely states. Let's move on to lean states. Remember, lean states are states that would go by less than 5%, but more than 1.5%. So among the Democratic lean states, I think we could probably classify states like Nevada. I would go as far as saying, as of right now, states like Arizona would also qualify as a lean Democratic state. So these two races, in my eyes, are also very interesting because more in Nevada than Arizona, it's very contingent on who ends up being the nominee. For example, in Nevada, we have Catherine Cortez Masto. She's semi-popular. I mean, she's not through the roof popular. She's pretty boring campaigner, But I think that one of the things that's going to come into play in this race is, will the Republicans have enough excitement? And I think to a certain level and to a certain degree, there's going to be certain types of excitement. However, I do think that, they're not running the right candidate. Adam Laxalt is a good candidate for Nevada. But I think ultimately Catherine Cortez Masto will be able to appeal to Hispanic populations that is more likely the group of people that could cause a lot of big damage for the Democrats in 2022. I think Catherine Cortez Masto could keep that, amount of voters. As for in Arizona, I think that, the nationwide environment could impact this race heavily. I mean, Mark Kelly was almost, I would say, on a direct train to being, reelected as senator. Now, I think that with the whole environment thing, I think it's going to go down a little bit, the Mark Kelly margins. And I think regardless, it would have been around less than 2.5%. And, at this point in time, there's certain issues that could, change this race a lot more. But overall, I would say that, Mark Kelly still does have certainly the advantage when it comes to the Senate race. And, while I kind of talk about Arizona, which also has a governor's race, I want to mention the fact that, these Senate races are very interesting because the national things do matter. At a governor's, point of view, at a governor's perspective, a governor race, that really doesn't matter what's going on in the nation, what's going on with the Biden administration. It has some impact with down ballot voters, but overall, the real impact isn't much. With the Senate race, it is a lot more important what the nationwide party says, what we know, everything that's going on happens, because ultimately, this has direct impact on what the administration is able to do or not to. And, I think that that's also a thing that a lot of voters, might think about, but also it's kind of the restrictiveness, I guess, in the states. They're not going to be the same race as the governor's race. And I think it's something that's very interesting. But moving on to our, Republican likely, or lean states rather, I think we're looking at places like Iowa, Ohio, state I forgot, I don't know why, my home state of Florida. I think Marco Rubio would easily win by 5%. So that would go, or more rather, that would go into our likely column. But right now, I think that the Republicans have a lean win in Iowa and Ohio, and I would go as far as saying is New Hampshire as well because of Chris Sununu. So with these states, I think we're seeing interesting races in Iowa and Ohio, where in Iowa we have Chuck Grassley, who's getting pretty old, and Abby Finkenauer, she's running against him. And Abby Finkenauer is a former representative, from a rural part of Iowa. And I think she could be run an interesting campaign and give Chuck Grassley a run for his money. Chuck Grassley's getting old. I would say this is likely Chuck Grassley's last term in the U.S. Senate if he doesn't end up winning this race. And I think Abby Finkenauer could easily, with the right messaging, get this race down. I still think that Chuck Grassley is going to end up being the winner because he's the incumbent and he's been there forever. And ultimately, that's what probably is going to end up happening. As for Ohio, we're seeing a very interesting, race here because there's primaries, because this is an open seat. And ultimately, I think Ohio has moved so far to the right that I think it's kind of almost to the point of no return. And yes, people like Sherrod Brown have won in this race, or in the state of Ohio. But I think that with the nationwide environment, with, a lot of the kind of Tea Party, the moderate, I would call it the neo-Tea Party movement, a lot of people worried about the economy and the debt of the country. A lot of people worried about COVID. Ohio, I think, is going to go to the Republican Party. And, when we talk about these states that could go to the Republicans, you also have New Hampshire. And, New Hampshire is a very interesting state in that it's very contingent if one person runs. If Chris Sununu does not run, Maggie Hassan has this race locked up. I mean, it's going to be super easy win. Now, if Chris Sununu runs, it's going to throw a wrench in her plans, and she might have to rethink what she's going to be doing for the next 6 years or more. And with Chris Sununu, he's super popular, and I would be surprised if he does not run for governor or for Senate. And I think it's something that he really should think about. I think at this point, it's something that's very likely to happen. It's been very hyped up. And if he does run, I think he easily wins here by more than 3%. So that leaves only our toss-up slates still left to fill in. Toss-up seats are states that would go by less than 1.5%. So as you can tell, these seats will all be close. But let's start off with the Republicans for this instance. So I think the Republicans are going to do well in a couple races. I think they're going to do well in North Carolina. I think they're going to do very well in Wisconsin. And I think they're going to narrowly edge out in Pennsylvania. So a lot of the things that we're talking about here comes down to the nationwide environment. And I think that in these three states is where we're going to be seeing a lot of the big changes in that. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are two Rust Belt states that vote solidly with the economy. The economy is not in its best state right now, and I think it's going to be easier for the Republicans to campaign in these, places. Wisconsin is still, unknown, kind of almost known that Ron Johnson is probably not going to run. He kind of said that unofficially. He still hasn't made an official decision. I may be wrong. Last time I checked, that was how it was. But, even though I think that even if Ron Johnson doesn't run, the Republicans could probably find a candidate here that could win based on the nationwide environment. And honestly, with these Senate races, I think the most important thing is going to be where Biden takes the country. If Biden is able to pick it up, get it together, and start, somewhat of an economic boom, or, fix some of the situations that have turned a lot of voters away from him. Remember, he's lost a lot of approval, and it's significantly. So if he's able to fix that, I think that some of these seats like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania could end up, coming back into the, Democratic column. As far as North Carolina goes, Ted Budd right now, he is expected to win the Republican nomination. He's going against Cheri Beasley. Cheri Beasley is an interesting candidate, but I think that she's a candidate, I would compare her sort of to Sarah Gideon in a way that, people overhype how much support she could get. I think that Cheri Beasley, she's going to have her support in certain areas, but I'm not sure and not convinced how well she's going to do in the suburban areas and, getting into the rural areas as well, because I think that for the Democrats to win in North Carolina, they have to do extremely well in the suburbs, which they've been doing better and better consistently. But more importantly, they're going to have to go back and win the rural vote. They've been, that have decided elections like this in the past. The reason why Obama and people before him won in places like Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina is because they still had the rural support. And since that's no longer a thing for the Democrats, it's going to be pretty tough. And that brings me to the last state of Georgia. I think that ultimately here, we're going to end up seeing a victory for Raphael Warnock. Raphael Warnock is someone who I personally think is a strong candidate for Georgia. And even though Herschel Walker is running in this race, and he's gotten Trump's endorsement and things like that, I think ultimately Georgia is a state that is going to be a little bit hard, to go back on for the Republican Party because of the Trump effects that have been left in the state. Now, I did want to talk about one general trend I think will happen in the 2022 midterm election, and that is we're going to see a Midwest that's going to become more and more solid, or I guess not solid, but trend red. However, in the Sun Belt, we're going to see some trends that are going to be more towards the Democrats. And I think that the 2022 midterm election is going to be a very interesting event based on where the country is right now and what is to, follow those midterm elections. So guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. Again, guys, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys so much for watching, and goodbye.